How significant was Nelson Mandela to South Africa and its anti-apartheid movement? Nelson Mandela was truly a one-of-a-kind person who deeply influenced the history of South Africa through his actions. In this video, I'll be covering the significance of this figure and delving deeper into who Nelson Mandela was and how he became a prominent figure throughout South Africa. What Mandela's involvement was in activism and the consequences he faced for his actions. How Mandela influenced the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa. And an overview of Nelson Mandela's accomplishments and his influence around the world. However, first we must cover the topic of apartheid and how it was significant to South Africa. Derived from the Afrikaans word meaning separateness or apartness, apartheid was a system of racial segregation that had governed the South African native people for close to 50 long years. In 1948, after the National Party gained power, the all-white government enforced this act of systemic racism across the nation. Prime Minister of South Africa, Daniel Malan, was in office during the formation of the apartheid laws and mentioned in a parliamentary speech that today South Africa belongs to us, and may God grant us that it will forever remain our own. This quote perfectly highlights the power-hungry and imperialistic nature of the National Party, who gave no regard or care to those who lived on the land, considering them a barbaric race who embraced heathenism. There were 148 apartheid laws which ultimately aimed to enforce the dominance of white superiority over the non-white society in nearly all aspects of life. From public facilities being separated, to being mandated to carry an ID, to the freedoms of black South African people, it was non-existent. The country was separated into 4 distinct racial categories: white, black, coloured and Indian, and even marriage between races was banned under the newly legislated laws. It was resistance to the government's exploitations through apartheid which ultimately paved way to protests and riots throughout the nation, and from this came the rise of prominent leaders. Who was Nelson Mandela and how did he become a prominent figure within the ANC? In June 18, 1918, Rolihlahla Mandela was born. Recognizing there was potential for something good, at the age of 8, his father sent him to a Methodist missionary school, making the first in his family to do so. It was here that he was given the name Nelson, which would later stick throughout his life. Early in his life, Mandela was passionate about politics and would often join in on protests in his local township. After moving to Johannesburg for work, he came to understand the realities of how black South Africans were really treated. Historian Charles Olsteen stated that it was Mandela's experience in Johannesburg which would influence his humanitarian views. And from Mandela's book No Easy Walk to Freedom, he further mentions that this drove him to study law in hopes of representing and speaking for the black South Africans. In 1944, Mandela joined the African National Congress, a South African political party and black nationalist organization which aimed to give voting rights to black people. It was with this party that Mandela formed the Youth League, a planned program of peaceful protest. Through these actions, Nelson Mandela became a well-known figure within the ANC. How was Nelson Mandela involved in activism and what consequences did he face for his actions? As mentioned before, Mandela was heavily active within the ANC and in 1951 was elected as the president of its Youth League. Undeterred, Mandela and his Youth League, together with the South African Indian Congress, a group which was mentored by Mahatma Gandhi, organized an ongoing defiance campaign. Historian William Steenkamp comments that this campaign was initiated in response to growing injustices perpetrated by the institution of apartheid legislation. On the 21st of March 1960, 5,000 people gathered outside the Sharpeville police station to declare a non-violent protest. However, when the police opened fire on the public, resulting in hundreds wounded and 69 people dead, the sense of shock and horror became even more apparent to the onlooking nations. The Sharpeville Massacre, as it became known, was a defining moment in the struggle within freedom. This forced Prime Minister of the British government, Harold Macmillan, to famously say,
of Britain to register on the widest possible scale their passionate protest against an evil and repulsive doctrine, which says that a man's legal status, a man's political rights, a man's economic opportunities, a man's social position shall depend solely upon the color of his skin.
From the actions presented in Sharpeville, Mandela knew that peaceful protests were futile and campaigned for a new method of resistance. However, the ANC was a non-violent organization, so MK was formed, meaning Spear of the Nation, who began to coordinate campaigns of criminal warfare with the intent to destabilize the government, prompting a withdrawal of foreign money. To further expand his military training, Mandela, who was labelled as a terrorist by the South African government, was smuggled to other nations to meet with groups which would help fight against the inequality in South Africa. However, once he'd returned, Nelson Mandela was arrested and charged with the incitement and leaving the country without a passport, and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. On the 9th of October 1963, he would once more appear in court in an infamous Ravona trials. Ultimately, this would result in Mandela and 10 other ANC members being sentenced to life behind bars. How did Nelson Mandela influence change in society whilst being in prison, and how was apartheid dismantled? With Mandela in prison and bloodshed and violence on display, South Africa was in dreary times. However, Nelson Mandela was not forgotten. The people fought and continued to stand up for what he had begun. Despite spending decades in the slumber, his mind was not tainted, and the freedom he desired was for equality, not revenge. Members of the government started to mention,
"There is no justification for keeping Mr. Mandela in prison, and that the only way in which we can start resolving the problems of our country is in an unconditional release of Mr. Mandela."
When F.W. de Klerk was appointed as the new president, he met with Mandela several times to discuss how the nation could be reunified. Following this, he unbanned the African National Congress, and negotiations between the ANC and the National Party underwent. This resulted in Nelson Mandela being freed on February 11, 1990, after serving 27 years in prison. Shortly after, a new constitution, which enfranchised blacks and other racial groups, took effect, and introduced a new coalition government with a non-white majority, led by the 7th President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Historian Boris Boffa mentioned that this act was the official end of the apartheid system in South Africa. An overview of Nelson Mandela's accomplishments and the influence around the world. Nelson Mandela was a unique individual whose actions influenced the entire world. From his life story, we're able to determine the anguish and determination he demonstrated to fight for equality among all races in South Africa. From his drive to change and efforts in ending the apartheid peacefully, Mandela and de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. The following year, as mentioned previously, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the President of South Africa, becoming the first ever black president in South African history. In 1999, after retiring from politics, Mandela founded the Nelson Mandela Foundation to use his experience and knowledge to create strategic networks and partnerships to pursue social justice. Furthermore, after learning about the dangerous virus which killed millions in Africa, Mandela started the 4664 campaign in aims to help raise awareness for AIDS and HIV. However, despite being one of the greatest leaders to walk the earth, there was one thing Mandela could never truly accomplish.
That I never became the heavyweight boxing champion of the world.